A parent's nightmare is a situation where your daughter goes out one night and never comes back. Their grief is uncalculable.
After months of silence, the Los Angeles County District Attorney finally spoke today about the potential prosecution of the singer, known as D4vd. The artist linked to the brutal death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The atmosphere inside that room was heavy, cold, almost suffocating. A press conference unfolded that finally peeled back layers of an investigation hidden from the public for 7 long months, answering questions that have haunted this case from the very beginning. Before going any further into the dark details of this case, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps bring these stories of justice to more viewers who care about the truth. Now, let's walk through everything that came to light today, because what was revealed changes the entire trajectory of this case. For 7 months, the public waited. Families waited. Investigators waited. And today, that wait finally ended. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office held a high-stakes press conference that shifted the ground beneath this entire investigation. District Attorney Nathan Hochman stepped to the podium, standing shoulder to shoulder with the top brass of the LAPD. The visuals in that room were striking. A fresh mugshot of David Anthony Burke on one side, and a photograph of young Celeste Rivas Hernandez on the other. The wait was over. The world was about to learn whether David Anthony Burke would face criminal charges and exactly what the state of California planned to bring against him. This update came just 1 week after the stunning arrest of the 21-year-old artist taken into custody on suspicion of ending Celeste's young life. 7 months. That was the timeline. 7 months since her remains were discovered, dismembered, hidden inside the trunk of a vehicle tied directly to the singer. The legal limbo that followed, arrested but not formally charged, left the public confused, the family desperate, and investigators tight-lipped. Something felt off. Reports from outlets like TMZ suggested that a very specific legal path was already being paved behind the scenes. A grand jury had reportedly been examining the evidence for quite some time before law enforcement moved in to make the arrest. So why the delay in filing? Many wondered whether the evidence was too thin, or whether the grand jury simply wasn't convinced by the prosecution's narrative. Perhaps they didn't have the authority to issue an indictment at all. Perhaps they were called only to preserve testimony while the investigation continued in the background. There were even whispers, TMZ caught wind of them too, that the LAPD and the District Attorney's Office were at odds, possibly working against each other. But after today's briefing, that theory begins to fall apart. And the reason why will become clear in just a moment. First, a look back at last week's statement from the LAPD's Public Information Office. They confirmed that detectives from the Robbery Homicide Division had taken David Anthony Burke, 21 years old, into custody for the murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Burke was denied bail immediately. The case file was set to be handed over to the district attorney for a final decision. The district attorney's office also weighed in late last week, sharing their own perspective on the unfolding situation. Spokesperson Greg Risling acknowledged the arrest, confirming they were fully aware of the LAPD's actions against Burke. The case would move to the Major Crimes Division, where prosecutors would meticulously examine the evidence to determine whether formal charges could stand. At that point, prosecutors were playing their cards extremely close to the vest. The promise was simple. An update would arrive Monday morning once the dust settled on their decision. That careful bureaucratic phrasing made many wonder if real tension was brewing behind the scenes. LAPD Captain Scott Williams later spoke about the moment officers moved in on David Anthony Burke at his Hollywood Hills home. According to Williams, investigators had been tracking him as carefully as possible. But once enough evidence existed to support a murder charge, the surveillance intensified. He confirmed that officers didn't simply show up at the door. They arrived with a probable cause warrant in hand. Photos from that scene revealed a heavy tactical presence outside the residence. Burke was seen in handcuffs, looking like a man whose entire world had just collapsed. A neighbor described the scene as overwhelming. Officers everywhere. A loudspeaker echoing through the hills demanding a surrender. Naturally, Burke's legal team pushed back hard. Attorneys Blair Burke, Marilyn Bednarski, and Regina Peter were not staying quiet. Their official statement was blunt. They wanted to be crystal clear about their position. According to the defense, the evidence would eventually prove that David Anthony Burke had nothing to do with Celeste's death and certainly did not kill her. They emphasized that no grand jury had returned an indictment and no formal complaint had been filed at that time. Even though District Attorney Nathan Hochman might tell a different story now, the defense maintained that Burke was being held only on a shadow of suspicion. The defense vowed to fight for his innocence with everything they had. That was the position last week. But fast forward to today, and the entire situation has shifted beneath everyone's feet. Before going further, one important development. TMZ reported that sources inside the medical examiner's office had officially classified Celeste's death as a homicide, which brings the story to the courtroom reality of today. Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman stood before a wall of microphones earlier in the day, flanked by senior officials from the LAPD. Captain Scott Williams was present, as mentioned earlier. Officials also confirmed that veteran prosecutor Beth Silverman would be taking the lead on the case. It was a calculated move. Earlier reports had already indicated that Silverman was the one presenting evidence to the grand jury behind closed doors. Silverman is a career prosecutor with a reputation for being relentless, particularly when it comes to high-profile homicide cases. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting on. After 7 agonizing months, Hochman finally revealed the fate of David Anthony Burke. He announced the formal charges against Burke, the artist publicly known as D4vd. Stylized as the letter D, the number 4, the letter V, and the letter D, Burke was being charged in connection with the savage and horrific murder of Celeste, who was only 14 years old at the time of her death. These were the most severe allegations a district attorney can file, specifically first-degree murder with special circumstances. And those circumstances were chilling. Lying in wait, a killing motivated by financial gain, and the targeted execution of a witness in a criminal investigation. Because of these special factors, the first-degree murder charge now carries a maximum penalty of life in prison, without the possibility of parole or even death. The district attorney's office stated that the decision on whether to pursue the death penalty would come at a later date. But the murder charge was only the first layer. Several additional counts followed, among them continuous sexual abuse, lewd acts with a child under 14 years of age, and the gruesome mutilation of human remains. Before walking through the legal weight of these crimes, Hochman paused. He stepped away from the role of district attorney for a moment and spoke simply as a father. He referenced his own 3 children, describing the ultimate nightmare for any parent, a daughter who walks out one evening and never comes home again. He stressed something important. The description of these counts was not the actual evidence that would be presented before a judge. The charges themselves do not function as evidence. That weight rests on the shoulders of witness testimony, on the paper trail, on the documents, and on every form of forensic record collected throughout the investigation. Every piece of admissible proof would aim toward a single goal, the trial of David Anthony Burke. 12 strangers would have to be convinced, beyond any reasonable doubt, that every single one of these grim charges and special allegations was the absolute truth. And that is where the layers of this case begin to unfold. Deep down, many had expected a murder charge once the handcuffs were placed on Burke. Leaked court documents from months earlier had hinted at a homicide investigation, but first-degree murder with special circumstances, that is a completely different level of darkness. The allegations described lying in wait, silencing a witness to protect himself. And the coldest motive of all, killing for financial gain, Burke was now staring down the possibility of the death penalty. And even with California's current moratorium on executions, the simple fact that capital punishment is on the table changes everything about this case. The district attorney's reasoning would soon become clear why prosecutors believed the evidence pointed towards such a calculated, deliberate crime. Multiple legal avenues exist to prove a homicide. But here, every single road leads to the same conclusion. The state believes Burke is the architect of this tragedy. Of course, under American law, he remains innocent until a jury decides otherwise. The full scope of the evidence remains hidden. But the sexual assault charges introduce a deeply disturbing thread that has been pulled at for months. Steve Fisher, a private investigator working for the Hollywood Hills homeowner where Burke had been staying, sounded the alarm long before today. That house sat just a stone's throw from where the abandoned Tesla and the body inside it was eventually discovered. Fisher had been adamant for some time that Burke should already have been facing charges for sex crimes, beyond the blood, beyond the murder itself. There existed a disturbing trail of evidence pointing toward an alleged sexual relationship with a minor. Hochman used a very specific word to describe it: continuous, meaning this was not a single incident, it was a pattern. And the digital footprint reportedly uncovered during this investigation is deeply troubling. What kind of digital evidence are investigators referring to? Text messages, incriminating photographs, possibly even videos that document the unthinkable, perhaps statements from people who were physically present and witnessed events as they unfolded. This is where Hochman began to peel back the layers of competing legal theories. Lying in wait, the murder of a witness. Each one carries chilling implications. According to the complaint on April 23, 2025, 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez arrived at Burke's house in the Hollywood Hills. She was never heard from again. Then on September 8, 2025, the remains of Celeste were discovered. 2 bags. That is how she was found. Dismembered. Decaying. Hidden inside the front trunk of a vehicle registered to David Anthony Burke. The discovery was grisly, and from that moment on, the hunt for the truth began. Investigators had to look back through months of silence. The goal was simple in concept, but daunting in reality. Find out who ended Celeste's young life. Pause for a moment and consider this. If the prosecution's timeline is accurate, what could a 14-year-old girl possibly have known that made someone willing to take her life to keep her silent? Share your theory in the comments below. This was not a solo operation. It was a joint effort. A relentless partnership between the LAPD's elite robbery homicide detectives and the district attorney's office. From the very first lead, to the moment handcuffs went on, to the filing of formal charges. Throughout it all, police and prosecutors moved in perfect sync, never wavering. There was no crack in the foundation, no internal disputes, no second guessing, just a unified front that led directly to the serious charges seen today. When the indictment is examined closely, 3 distinct paths the prosecution is taking become visible. First, the count of first-degree murder elevated by heavy special circumstances, lying in wait. That is the core of it. The state alleges that on the night of April 23, 2025, Celeste arrived at Burke's home because he invited her there. She walked inside, and the world never heard her voice again. Then comes the second motive. Cold, hard cash. The prosecution argues this murder was committed for financial gain. Once the trial begins, and the evidence finally hits the courtroom floor, a clearer picture is expected to emerge. This was about preservation. Burke had a massive high-paying music career to protect. And on that night, Celeste had become a direct threat to his empire. But it does not end there. Beyond the ambush and the money, prosecutors added a third charge, the murder of a witness. The courtroom is expected to hear a chilling narrative about why she allegedly had to be silenced. Celeste was the witness, and the investigation she could have triggered involved Burke's own dark secrets, allegations of horrific sexual acts involving her when she was not even 14 years old. That is what he was reportedly trying to bury. It is a lot to take in. When you read between the lines, the picture becomes terrifying. She arrived at the property at that house in the Hollywood Hills, under the impression she was welcome. But the prosecution alleges she was lured. He brought her there. He invited her into his space. And the theory is he did so because he had already decided she would not leave alive. Assuming these allegations hold weight, an unsettling question arises. What was she about to do? Was she finally ready to speak out? Was she planning to tell someone the truth about what was happening between them? Perhaps she was preparing to go to the police. No one can say for certain. But whatever her plan was, it placed his entire public image at risk. And so allegedly he silenced her forever. To make sure the album would still drop. The endorsements would remain. The tour would proceed without a single hitch. That is likely how the prosecution will frame it. That is expected to be the very heart of their theory. But here is the real challenge. How do you prove that intent? How do you show a jury that the timing and the circumstances point to a calculated execution? There may be damning text messages, witness testimony. Only time will tell. The layers run deep. And during the grand jury phase, there were whispers. Reports suggested that a high-level record executive may have actually taken the stand. Allegedly, of course. But what did Burke's inner circle truly know? What conversations were happening behind closed doors about his finances and his crumbling reputation? These are pieces of the puzzle, still being assembled. Now attention turns to what Hochman shared regarding Celeste's grieving family. Hochman acknowledged having sat down with members of her family. The weight of their grief, he said, was beyond words. There is no way to measure the pain of losing a child this way. Their demands had been made very clearly, and the district attorney's office alongside the LAPD gave them their word. They would deliver exactly what the family asked for. Undeniable proof of who took their daughter's life. They would show the family how it happened, when it happened, and they would make absolutely certain that the killer finally faced justice. The man placed firmly in their crosshairs is David Anthony Burke. At that moment, Hochman yielded the floor to LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell. But he did not simply offer logistical updates on the investigation. He went deeper, addressing the boiling frustration of a public that had been demanding answers and transparency while the department remained silent. For 7 long months, the department had been criticized for how the case was handled and for refusing to leak details. The chief made clear that the goal was never to feed the rumor mill. The goal was to secure a conviction, and that requires a kind of discipline and patience that most people simply do not have. Every single move had a single aim: justice for Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and for every person who ever loved her. Investigators could not risk a single misstep. Not one word could be allowed to compromise the integrity of the prosecution. At first, Celeste was just a name on a runaway report filed in Riverside County, California. But as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing reality. She had been entangled in a sexual relationship with Burke, a child groomed by a man twice her age. On April 23, 2025, Celeste arrived at the house in the Hollywood Hills. After that total silence, no one ever saw her alive again. It was not until September 8, 2025, that what remained of her was finally found. Her body dismembered, ravaged by time, discovered inside the front trunk of David Anthony Burke's impounded Tesla. From that point forward, the investigative team was working a case that was both brutal and incredibly complex. The state of the body was so devastating that the medical examiner could not immediately determine her cause of death. Too much time had passed. By the moment she was found, the most sensitive forensic clues had simply vanished. While detectives hunted for the real story, they had to fight through a sea of public misinformation. It demanded cold focus, and a refusal to be swayed by anything other than facts. Even with the world watching and the pressure climbing to a boiling point, the detectives in the robbery homicide unit did not flinch. They stayed on the job. They gathered massive amounts of forensic and digital data. They stayed disciplined, focused, obsessed with the truth. The long hours spent working hand in hand with the district attorney's office is exactly what led to this moment. This was not luck. It took coordination and a relentless drive for justice. And in cases like this one, that is exactly how it works. You do not show your hand too early. You simply cannot. Give a defense attorney an inch of space to claim the investigation was biased or that evidence was ignored, and the entire case can fall apart. But there is more to the story of how she died. The public has not seen it yet due to a court order. Those autopsy files remain under lock and key. Hochman addressed several issues directly, including the specific allegations and special circumstances that will eventually be presented in court. He remained tight-lipped about the details. But he did offer a few additional hints regarding the coroner's findings. Prosecutors are reportedly moving quickly to obtain a court order that would finally allow the coroner's report to be released to the public. Once that report is out, the world will see what the coroner actually found. That will be a massive piece of this puzzle. It is a grim reality. But the process of trying to determine how someone died when examining remains that have reportedly been dismembered is a forensic nightmare. Can investigators actually prove it was strangulation, poisoning blunt, force trauma, a gunshot? It is a dark path to follow. But the question lingers. Was the act of dismemberment itself the actual cause of death? And the defense attorneys are already insisting their client did not kill her. Will they offer their own theory of what happened? Are we headed toward a courtroom collision between high-priced medical experts? Or will the defense attempt to pin the entire tragedy on a mystery person to explain Celeste's death? Reporters asked Hochman a direct question. Why did the arrest take so long when the body was allegedly found inside Burke's own car? Chief McDonnell answered firmly. Without a witness or a clear video, you cannot rush a case like this. You must be methodical. You must comb through every byte of digital data and every scrap of forensic evidence. You must lean on witnesses, some who want to help and some who would rather be anywhere else to figure out who did what. You need the timeline, the method, and what was happening in the killer's mind at that exact moment. That is what investigators have been doing from roughly September 8th all the way up to today's announcement of formal charges. In a case like this one, you do not move forward until you have every possible shred of information secured in the file. Officials issued a public appeal as well. If anyone listening knows something about this murder, or about any other actions taken by David Anthony Burke, They are asked to contact the Los Angeles Police Department or the County District Attorney's Office and tell them what they know. The statement offered a glimpse into the evidence, or perhaps the carefully guarded lack of it. People always look for that one smoking gun moment. But it is the total weight of everything, the forensic trail, and the words of witnesses who are either helping or hiding something that builds a real case. Is there someone talking in exchange for a deal? A great deal of attention has remained on Neil Langston. He was reportedly David Anthony Burke's friend, but he was later arrested in Montana, apparently for ignoring a grand jury summons. TMZ reported that his actual testimony lasted only about 30 to 40 minutes. If that is accurate, was he being uncooperative? Is he even a key witness? It is difficult to say with certainty. Neil Langston's name was not mentioned during today's briefing, but Hochman confirmed that the investigation remains wide open. Investigators believe they have their man. They are relying on the mountain of evidence the robbery-homicide team spent months stacking together. They are highlighting the heavy lifting done by the district attorney's team. There is a quiet confidence in their words, a belief that they can support these heavy charges, the special allegations, and the grim circumstances surrounding this case. And then came the moment when Hochman addressed the elephant in the room. Whether anyone else might also face charges. Is another arrest looming for those in Burke's immediate circle? Did he act entirely alone, or was someone else hiding in the shadows? Hochman remained silent on that point. He stated that if any further action is taken, the world will see it. For now, however, he was not commenting. When pressed on whether the actual mechanics of the killing were known beyond the obvious fact that it was ruled a homicide, the specific cause of death, Hochman explained that the coroner's findings were coming soon. Since that report remains sealed, he would not comment yet. When asked simply whether the answer is known, without disclosing the details, only whether the mystery has finally been solved, Hochman confirmed that the coroner has reached a final conclusion regarding Celeste's death. Once those records become public, more information will follow. Was there a singular moment, a breakthrough last week, a piece of physical evidence that finally pins this murder on him? According to Hochman, prosecutors have it. Physical proof, forensic trails, digital breadcrumbs. They intend to lay it all out in court to prove these crimes beyond any shadow of a doubt. When asked about the so-called smoking gun and how Burke's trip to Santa Barbara fits into the timeline of the murder, Hochman declined to dissect the evidence piece by piece. That, he said, is for the courtroom. And as for the idea of a smoking gun, the real smoking gun is rarely one single thing. It is the mountain of evidence built to prove any case, especially one like this, beyond a reasonable doubt. Is the investigation still ongoing? Absolutely. It is far from over. If new leads surface regarding other crimes, they will be chased down without hesitation. One final question loomed in the room. People had been talking about how difficult this case has been to crack. Even the chief had acknowledged the hurdles. So, where then does this confidence come from? According to Hochman, it comes from the weight of the evidence collected by robbery-homicide and the relentless work of the district attorney's office. That is what brought them to this point. They are at a place where they are certain they can prove every one of these serious charges and every special allegation beyond a reasonable doubt. It is also possible that the net widens. More arrests. More charges. Perhaps someone stops talking. Perhaps someone refuses to provide testimony. But investigators are not letting go. They will follow this trail wherever it leads. And so, after 7 long months of silence, 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez finally has a voice in the form of formal charges against the man accused of taking her life. A young girl with her entire future ahead of her, reduced to remains hidden in the trunk of a car. A family broken. A community demanding answers. And a justice system now preparing to prove its case in front of 12 strangers in a Los Angeles courtroom. Whatever the trial reveals in the weeks and months ahead, Celeste Rivas Hernandez deserves to be remembered. Not as a headline, but as a child whose life was stolen far too soon. If this case moved you, and if you believe stories like Celeste deserve to be told, please take a moment to hit the like button right now. It really does make a difference. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these voices alive. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell as well, so you never miss a new investigation the moment it drops. One final question worth sitting with. If the prosecution is right, and David Anthony Burke truly killed Celeste Rivas Hernandez to protect his career, how many warning signs were missed along the way? How many adults could have intervened and didn't? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until the next case unfolds, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking the difficult questions. Because behind every headline is a real person, a real family, a real life that mattered. Celeste Rivas Hernandez deserved the chance to grow up, to dream, to live. And no verdict can ever return what was taken from her. But the truth, wherever it leads, can still be pursued. And that is what every investigation, every trial, and every conversation like this one is ultimately about. Thank you for staying through to the end. For caring. For wanting to understand the human story behind the case. Until next time. Take care of yourselves and take care of one another. See you in the next case.